Welcome, everyone, to Becoming a Better Ancestor with Well-Being and Equity, or We in the World. We have some wonderful folks here to share experiences around being ancestors and learning from ancestors. And this is the first in the series, Well-Being for All webinar series, which Co-Creative is co-hosting with Academy for Systems Change. So we're going to introduce the series here, and we're going to then turn it over for the most part to the folks from We in the World who are sharing their wisdom and experience, and I think also their beautiful ways of being with us in this session. So actually, I'm going to start by saying we're recording this. So if you choose to say something embarrassing and verbally in the chat or whatever, that will be all part of your ancestors' record for the storybooks. That's okay. We want to create a space that's open, that's vulnerable, that's safe for us to share what we want to share. And in that context, we welcome, you might have animals crawl up in your laps, you might have babies with you, you might have dirty laundry in the background. I know I have some right over here. You might have, like I have some car parts on the table behind me. We welcome all of that real life in this session. And just because we're physically distant from one another doesn't mean we can't co-create an intimate space here together. So want to jump into some quick introductions. Some of you know Co-Creative, but if you don't, we're a consultancy that does training and support around complex systems change and collaborations across all kinds of challenges and opportunities that we face as a species. And we have Marta Cerroni from Academy for Systems Change.
Thank you, Ras. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Marta Cerroni from the Academy for Systems Change. And this issue and question around well-being is very deeply personal, and it matters within the organization that I co-direct. We, in fact, engage with that question in terms of a vision. So we talk about well-being in the sense of transforming systems towards a future rooted in love that holds dignity, equity, belonging, thriving for all life. And so this vision permeates all that we do. And I'm very excited that this is the thread here in conversation today with our dear guests. So I'm thrilled to be here. It is also very personal, and I'll share more about that in the breakout groups. Happy to be here. Thank you, Ras. Back to you.
Thank you. So in this series, we're going to be inquiring together into well-being, thrivability, aliveness, flourishing. There's a whole bunch of different words that we've been inquiring into as part of this inquiry. And obviously, we're going to be focusing on all of those in some way, even though we're focusing particularly on well-being here. And what are the conditions for well-being, and how do we contribute to well-being for ourselves, for our communities, and for the world? We see this as part of cultivating a learning community, not necessarily a formal learning community, but if folks are interested in this topic, we will have more in this series, of course. We know We in the World has different learning communities around this, and I think we'll be able to explore and co-create other opportunities to come together in community and explore well-being for all and how we can contribute to that. We want to deepen and expand learning relationships at Co-Creative, I know, and also at the Academy, and of course, We in the World. We're all centering well-being in our work in support of collaboration for a world that works for all. And we're all exploring this question in different, and I think richly different and complementary ways. How do we come together to create conditions where we all can thrive? And today we're exploring this theme of becoming a better ancestor, what that might mean for us and our ways of being and doing this work. This is the rough flow of today's sessions. session. Warning, it will probably change a bit, so don't get too attached to any parts here. But we always make sure we've got some time for grounding and connecting, some sharing of stories and context from our presenters, and then getting into groups where we can reflect individually and together with others what the implications of this framing might be for our work. And then sharing some reflections back in plenary together, and then we'll close this session on time as promised. So I want to introduce Shoma Vasaha and Andrew Martin, or Drew Martin. They'll be sharing more about their stories in the context of their own ancestors. And I just want to say our team at Co-Creative really loves these folks and the team at We in the World. So committed to equity, so committed to inclusion and belonging and ways that people can show up authentically together. And we're learning a lot from them in different forms of partnership. So super happy to close my mouth now and turn it over to, I think, Shoma, who's going to tell the first of a couple of stories here.
Thank you so much, Russ. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm recognizing beautiful faces that I know and some that I don't necessarily know. But before we all jump into the meat, maybe we can spend a little bit of time getting to know one another. Next slide. This is an opportunity to share who you are. And Russ, would you like to go with this?
Sure. Yeah. So you could open a browser on your phone, on your computer, whatever you prefer, browse to slido.com and enter the code Ancestor, or I think Stella's putting a link into the chat here. So you'll be able to just click on that link and jump into the same poll. And you'll see 3 questions there. Your name, maybe 4 questions. Your name, one gift you're bringing to our time together, where you're joining from, ideally maybe a place we can find on a map. We get some responses like, I'm joining from my living room, which is helpful, but maybe not as informative as we're hoping. And then please share a word that comes up for you when you think about the word ancestor. Maybe a word or 2. All right, I'm going to share. If you have a Mac, it might have pulled you away from the poll, but if you need to finish, you can jump back to your browser. All right, let's just see together here what's coming up in terms of these gifts and the names that people have shared here. You'll see that this tool already started to identify some themes of curiosity, of love. We've got a gift is my spirit and soul to be present. I know a couple other people mentioned presence. A facility with tech, very much appreciated, Steve. This might be Deborah Nazan, being my authentic self with grace, gratitude, joy, and love. And I'll just share these others here so we can just recognize and appreciate beautiful different gifts that we're bringing. A lot of curiosity, openness, deep listening. Chelsea's bringing presence, Danny, curiosity. Kitty, bringing my attention and love for Alaska. Nice. Listening, peace, humility. And Drew's bringing the story, which we're going to hear soon. All right. Where are you joining from? Lagos, Des Moines, Manchester, Belmont, All right, beautiful. So many places represented here. So we asked in 1 to 2 words, please share what comes up for you when you think about the word ancestor. I'm not going to name anything here. I just want to give us time to absorb what we've shared together. And as you know, in a word cloud, the more a word was mentioned, the larger it is in the cloud. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Shoma, I'll share my screen for you here, okay?
Thank you, Russ. And I loved seeing those words come across in all the places, and to all our friends and team from around the world. I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for being here for this conversation about what it means to each of us to be a ancestor. Our work at We in the World is animated by stories and data and an understanding of why we need to engage in this work of being better ancestors. Some of you may know the story of these two boys who got their dads or best friends in kindergarten, and they got their dads one day to take them to the barber shop to get their head shaved because they believed that they were interchangeable with one another and could run pranks on their kindergarten teacher if their heads just looked the same. While I believe in the power of a perfect head, what we know and what we like to see is that this is an example of real proof that racism and structural inequity, racism is an acquired illness, but that it's an endemic disease underlying our systems. And that's true for any other kind of structural inequity. That what we know if we look deeply is that these two boys born in the same hospital could grow up just 2 miles apart with as much as a 20 to 30-year difference in their life expectancy. And that is true here more than just about any other place in the world, but we're not alone. That's true in South Africa, where shanty towns abut places of wealth. It's true in Mumbai and Kolkata. It just takes Google Maps and aerial views to see that drop in life expectancy. It's true in Guyana, in South America, in the Caribbean. It's true. It's true in Europe, though much less so because they've actually made some efforts to address structural inequities. And so for us, our work is about what is it, this work of being a better ancestor that can help to change that. We go to the next slide. We also come from looking at data and policies. And at first, when we began this journey, we said, what's underneath all of those maps? Why is it that if you look in place after place across our nation and across our world, we see some places, some neighborhoods, some groups of people that are set up not to thrive, to not have their best contribution or their best life be able to be made manifest? And what does it mean for others to have those conditions that they need to thrive? And what we saw underlying every one of these places are gears, they're structures and systems that human beings put into place that result predictably in people being segregated and isolated into places and groups that have opportunities to be able to live their best lives and those that didn't. Now, some of you may find yourself, when faced with such widespread evidence of our humanity's penchant and ability to marginalize, might find that sobering. And it certainly is sobering for us, but from our perspective, if human beings created this, then we have the power to undo it. every one of these gears, whether it's policies or systems or who we see we are, how we understand we are, who we know we can be, are opportunities to change that. And for me, as someone who grew up in India, came to the US, and went to places like Guyana and learned from Indigenous people that, in fact, it was entirely possible to change the system if we decided that we wanted to. It made us realize that this work could be done. And what we've learned on our journey so far at We in the World is it can't be done without all of us collectively choosing to be better ancestors, to understand and recognize the legacies that got us here in reality. And while we might talk about structural racism in the US, we could talk about the caste system in India, or divine mandate, or a system of class and serfdom in Europe. This is a false hierarchy of human value that concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a few and to the exclusion of many, is a common mechanism and a universal mechanism. So the question isn't who got us here or where we point fingers. The question is actually to ask, to acknowledge, to grieve, to lament what got us here, but then to go beyond that, just to hold that and say, what do we need to do to restore, to create and chart a better path forward? And to us, that's what it means to be a better ancestor. If we go to the next slide, we'll share a little bit about what that means. And we tend to be a little geeky, so we like things like system dynamic maps and stuff like that. There's much, much more complex ones that look at all these dynamic systems and build really cool simulations of what happens if we build relationship and belonging. But this is what it really gets to if you get to the heart of it. That at some level, we have to be able to understand, and as a people in the world, say and know that there are legacies for living together, that our ancestors who were in some relationship to one another, not necessarily equitable relationship, not necessarily by choice relationships, but our ancestors created something that created a world through the legacies that they left behind, created some things that were about dignity and inclusion for some groups of people, and many other choices that were about trauma and exclusion. And they encoded that in our structures and systems by intention, because it was meant to preserve that false hierarchy of human value. And that led some groups of people having the vital conditions they need, and some places having those vital conditions all of us need, like things like access to lifelong learning and a sense of belonging in our community, access to meaningful work and wealth, and a thriving natural environment that's free, that's where there's enough peace for children to grow up without experiencing the stress of the toxic stress that comes from warfare, whether that's warfare within the home, or warfare in the neighborhood, warfare in our society. Things that all of us need to thrive. And other places are left in conditions of trauma and exclusion. And in fact, that leads them to predictably be in adversity, an urgent need. And in fact, we've built whole economies up of people and groups that profit from the existence of an adversity economy. And that if we're serious about changing this, we need to, on the one hand, do these vertical shifts. We need to we need to actually shift from an adversity economy to a well-being economy, from an adversity culture that assumes that's reactive and responsive and puts all our resources there, to a culture of well-being. And we need to practice the difficult art of generational change. And we can think about that. But none of that can happen if we don't shift who we are at our core on the inside. Because in fact, the world is a manifestation in part of the legacies of the past and the legacies we're each building today, whether we're building them actively or whether we're building them by continuing on in a system that doesn't work. We have to understand that one way or the other, we are every day, at every moment, leaving legacies for the future and building legacies for the future. So as we think about this work of ancestry, one of the things we think a lot about in our work at We in the World and the Wellbeing in the Nation Network is how do we understand these legacies, both those that created harm and what was lost as groups were marginalized? What could we gain? How could we shift this to a journey of abundance? If we understand that there are systems that oppressed groups of people in my culture, which is, I come from the Baha'i faith, we say that every people every group of people, every person is noble, and that every group and person has a piece of the puzzle that's needed for the healing of the world. And so that act of removing systemic oppression, of removing the shackles of injustice that prevent people from expressing that piece of nobility within them, creates the opportunity as we're in relationship, not just for them to be able to survive, but for all of us collectively to thrive. Because the piece of the puzzle that they have to offer for the healing of the world can only come forward, can only join with ours in the context of relationship and healing. And to do that, we need to change the systems that predictably lead those two boys, best friends today, one of whom will not be around at the age of 80 to be best friends with the other. We need to create the conditions for that relationship, that space, that community to be one of healing, of joy, of reclamation, of renewal. And for us, this work of being a better ancestor and what it means for us to build legacies of reclamation and renewal is fundamentally the work that we're engaged in at We in the World and the WIN Network. If you there's a really busy slide that has like all our strategies mapped to this, which I will not bore you with today. But I think that that's fundamentally my ask of you is, what does this mean to be a better ancestor, both for your family and your children, but also what it means to be a better ancestor in the world that we live in? If you go to the next slide. So what does that mean for each of us? And I'll share a little bit about what that means for me if you go to the next slide. This is a picture of my father, my mother, the one on the left at my brother's wedding. Usually, if you were to see my dad, he is the worst picture taker in the entire world. He always looks, you guys all have some relative, right? They just look grumpy. So this one is one that I love because I caught him in an unexpected moment. We were dancing at my brother's wedding. My brother is this little guy over here who's 12 years younger than me. This is my grandmother. Often, some of you may have heard me speak about my mother. Her name means victorious in battle, and she was. She is the descendant of a grandmother. So my great grandmother was an organizer at the time of Mahatma Gandhi, was somebody who worked hard and to take down the caste system at risk to her life, and her husband supported her to do it. And that meant that my grandmother was educated, and my mother, even when we were as a family making about $10 a month, knew what it meant to have a life and a belief that the world could be changed. She had integrated resilience into her life, and she passed that down to me, that we were incredibly capable of changing the world, regardless of where we were. My father didn't have that same benefit. He came from a world where he lost his father during the time of partition as his family emigrated from Bangladesh to here. And that meant that by the time he was in the third grade, he had to drop out of school because his family, his father wasn't there and his mother was illiterate and couldn't actually afford the school fees for him to go to school. If you follow his path, that meant that he was made fun of. He had to survive. And by the third grade, he began, because he was a gifted student, his teachers urged him to apply for scholarships. They were homeless during much of his growing up, passed from family to family. But he managed to survive, managed to make it out, sometimes at near cost to his life. But it wasn't an easy path. His mother mental health issues, and experienced a great deal of trauma in the context of her father's passing. And so for my father, his story was about resilience and strength and the ability to make it through. It was about a relationship that with my mother, who he met when they were kids, that got him through. But it's also a story of generational both survival and resilience, but also generational trauma. And what it meant as he made it. He eventually made it. My family, I could tell you the whole story of how we made it out of India at another time. But what I'll tell you is, as they made it out, this idea of making it out, of never having to go back to a place where one was made fun of, one was homeless, one was not secure, became unbearable to my father, to the point where as we grew up, even small decisions we would make in our life that would seem to threaten that. For me, in my case, I was becoming a doctor rather than a research scientist, which was his path out of poverty. He eventually became a scientist and an engineer at Motorola, and has a patent that is responsible for some of the technology in our cell phones, all of which, of course, went to Motorola and not him. But regardless of his brilliance and ability to make it through, and the enormous luck that it took for my family to make it through, that generational trauma meant that any threat to that was perceived as almost an existential threat for our family. And that meant that it was hard for him to watch us grow and to be fully ourselves, because anything that went outside those parameters of life meant that it could threaten everything that he had spent his entire life fleeing from. We go to the next slide. That generational impacts of that, if had enormous.
I'm just going to stop and reshare because we've had a couple of notes that people aren't able to see. Let me just try this again. Be right back.
Sure, I'll just keep speaking, Russ, and then whenever I'm not really sharing slides as in reading talking points or something like that anyway. I'm just sharing my story. You know, it's taken time in our family to heal generational wounds, to have the courage to know both, my work is shaped by him, in the sense that everything I do is about what would it look like for us to create a world where he didn't have to have the luck that he did to win one of the scholarship, to have someone happen to go by his village and be willing to give him a chance, for my parents to win literally a lottery for 500 rupees. That meant they could bear to afford, they could make the last mile of affording a plane ticket for his graduate studies. Much of what I work on at We in the World in my life is about removing those systemic barriers and creating the pathways built on so many others for people to be able to see and grow and do the work that they have the ability to contribute, just as my father and my mother and the millions of people we knew in the streets of Kolkata, in the communities of Kolkata, had the capacity to do. But part of that healing of generational pain has also been understanding what it means to have new family, to reclaim our wholeness in a way that we're not afraid of our right to exist, our right to be, to belong, to create the conditions of that belonging for everyone, to have, as my niece Adira and my child Shohini, who's non-binary, is, as they navigate the world, what does it look like for us to create and define family? As we have kids that are neurodivergent and who are beginning to be and figure out who they are and what they mean, we have had to do the hard work of healing and figuring out what it means to be a family that knows that we not only have the ability to belong ourselves, but that we can use our power and privilege to create the conditions of belonging, of thriving, of contribution, of being for everyone. And these are pictures at our wedding recently, and you can see that the biggest focus was about what it meant to have family and joy. And if you go to the next slide, if you were to be there, the biggest piece that you'll see was just every kind of person that was there. Some of the people on this call I noticed were there, and watching who they were and how they created the conditions for community and belonging, for me meant in a small microcosm what it means to create that in our communities and in our nation for everyone. So if we go to the next slide. So that's a little bit of my story, what this has meant for me. And I'm going to invite each of you to begin to think of your story as well, as I invite in my colleague Drew into the conversation. Drew, would you be willing to share your story?
I will, and thank you so much, Shoma, for your beautiful story. And I was an attendee at that beautiful wedding, where it was just a kaleidoscope of people and races and just happiness, right? Is what we hope for in our world, right? Just a microcosm of what we hope for sure. I think the one word that has stood out, that was when we did the word scramble here, was responsibility. The greatest responsibility I have in my life by far is living a legacy of the man here on the left side of the PowerPoint. I've never met him, but I dream about him. I'm connected to him in such a unique way, not just, by blood, but just by, I don't know, just mythics, right? Whatever it is, right? It's mystical, the connection that I have with him. And a person that we're going to introduce you to a little bit taught me how to meditate. And I think it's because of that I've even grown a stronger connection to my ancestor. I can't imagine the trauma that my great-great-great-grandfather, Armstead Martin, had to endure. He was a slave for about 85% of his life. His father was the white slave owner by the name of Oliver Martin. And Oliver's father, Marshall Martin, had the, Russ, he had a mindset shift, I guess, back in the 1850s, and gave his land to his sons and became a born-again Methodist. And when he had that shift and became a born-again Methodist and then eventually an abolitionist, he decided in his will, in private, to will equal shares of his property to all his grandsons, regardless of race. So upon Marshall's death in 1867, my great-great-great-grandfather, Armstead, acquired about 100 acres of some swampy land in a small rural town called Silver Run, Alabama, which is it's about 45 minutes just east of Birmingham, just for proximity's sakes. And they called that land the Bottoms. That's what it was nicknamed, called the Bottoms. But because he was a landowner, even in the late 1860s, because he was a landowner, he also had the right to vote. Now, because the literacy test that was always a barrier, and any other thing that they could come up with, he never got that chance, right? He never actually got a chance to exercise his vote. But we recently found out that he, not only was he a landowner, but he used that status as a Black landowner to champion the right to vote for all freedmen. He understood land ownership, not sharecropping, was the key to positioning. It was numerous of times the stories tell of, white landowners coming and offering deals. And even though he wasn't literate, he understood numbers apparently. And he never gave up ownership, despite pressure, despite threats from the Ku Klux Klan. He never gave up ownership for sharecropping, because he understood that was the key to positioning future Martins like myself away from unnecessary suffering and struggling, which is, what was shown on our theory of change, that we're going to shift away from that And he had that foresight years ago. Armstead created a lineage of people that valued relationship and connection with the past generations as an essential for growth. And this my family, because of that, because he started family reunions way back then, that our unique connection to the land resulted in healing throughout the generations of Martins, even post-slavery. He saw me, I believe, 6 generations down the line. And part of me, and large part of me thriving today is because of the decision he made 150 years ago. He was a good ancestor because he broke away from traditions that caused harm. And like I said, he built connections and relationships that created better circumstances for generations of his family. In my opinion, being a better ancestor means that we capture and curate stories from our past that can help find solutions for the future. We build hope, right? My father spent the first 10 years of his retirement traveling the Deep South, uncovering everything I just shared. Prior to this, our family history could never predate the 20th century. It started in 1901. We had no idea of any of this prior to that. We also stopped treating the future of our planet as if it doesn't exist. When I was a kid, I used to get two new pairs of shoes a year, one right before school started and another for Christmas. So that week right before school started, that last week of summer, I took my shoes through hell, man. We were running through mud and dust and scratching them up, playing alley basketball, whatever, because I knew I was going to get a new pair in a week. I think we treat our planet like that, as if we're going to get a new planet. I know Elon and Jeff Bezos are out there trying to colonize new planets, but I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime or in any lifetimes. So we shouldn't treat our planet as if we're going to get another one next week. We appreciate that our interconnectedness as a world and realize that we all hold a piece of the puzzle and we must lead together. In my great-grandfather's will, he divided the property amongst his 17 children. One of them was my grandfather. And the only way a member could sell their portion was if the other 16 families agreed unanimously, making it pretty much impossible. I don't know if you guys have big families, but you're not even get 16 people to agree on anything, right? So making it impossible for any person from that lineage to not ever, to not own some land. Like, no matter who it is, me, my son, whoever, we will always own a piece of the American dream. We must understand that our individual strips, we all add value to our society. COVID left few people in our country free from some personal and family pain. As we heal, we must practice being good ancestors by eliminating the systems that cause us so much pain. We must break generational curses. Being a good ancestor promotes the end of transgenerational trauma. My mom, God bless her, blamed almost everything on generational curses, right? Especially if they're on my dad's side of the family, which was her responses to really uncured trauma. Good ancestors end that cycle by valuing family, valuing our planet, increasing our trust in society, and then tolerance for people's otherness. Are all new cycles that actually my wife and I have started with our children, and we're seeing how that's affecting the way that they connect with the world. And if you've met my children, which some of you have, you will see that right away. So the picture next to the screen was a picture that I took when I returned to the Martin farm in 2018, and I walked the land with the last descendant to the farm, which was my grandfather's youngest brother, Houston Martin. He's a former Army Ranger, and he outwalked me, even though I think he's 30 years older than me, man. He is just in shape. But we walked that 100 acres, and you can feel the presence of Armstead and all my ancestors who lived and died there working for free. But you can also see the progress of generations of Black farmers who profited from their labor and the families who thrived despite enormous barriers. And there was hardships, the Great Migration, Reconstruction, the death of my great-grandmother, Like I said, the Great Migration, 16 of the 17 people left and moved to Chicago over the course of 20 years. But that didn't not take away from the fact that the land is still there and that connection is still there. And even though I feel a great responsibility to live his legacy, I am connected with him because I believe he's the one that started our legacy as a family, and will be the one that we go to in generations to come. Next slide, please.
Russ, let's actually take a break and give people a chance to share in small groups about what the legacy means to them. And then when we get back from break, we're going to get to hear from talk a little bit about what it means to, yes, join in dismantling systems that don't work, but also to build, grow, and invest in those who are building communities that create justice and abundance and the conditions for collective healing and thriving. And what it means to know that we're always in both.
All right, so we're going to do breakout rooms. I think we won't do 18 minutes here. Just want to check with the team in terms of time. Maybe 14 minutes, Shoma, yep. So we have some suggestions here, but essentially the theme is to do very quick introductions of yourselves, just to kind of share a bit about who you are and maybe how you contribute in the world. And then if you could spend the bulk of your time sharing, maybe you want to share the word that came up for you when you thought about the word ancestor. Maybe you'd like to share what being a better ancestor might mean to you and for you, and including how it might shift your way of being and doing, whether it's in your work, in your personal life, in your community, however you want to focus on that. Silvana, I see your hand. We'll just set this up and see if there are any other questions. And then I think Shoma will be able to put us into the rooms. I do want to encourage you to mindfully share the speaking time in your groups. So, so that we can get everybody's stories, everybody's perspective, wisdom, etc. You'll be in about groups of 3 or 4, maybe. Silvana, you had a question or an observation, reflection? No? Okay. Stella, just checking, are we good to go on breakout rooms?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
in them.
So we'll put you in the rooms for about 14 minutes. There'll be a 1-minute warning before they're about to close, just so you know that you'll have 60 seconds to wrap up at the end before we come back together in this main room. You'll also see the prompts that I shared in the Zoom chat now.
Speak as you are in your breakout rooms.
My first thought is it's really wonderful to be in a group and feel the overall resonance of like-minded people. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of power in that, and also in the small group.
I think in my group we had some like variance in ages, which was really nice. And just like hearing the word ancestor, I think it brings up different things for different people depending on what life stage you're in. And so I think I always value like hearing what somebody else is thinking about that versus where I am. So, yeah.
Hard when you're young to imagine yourself an ancestor, isn't it? But aren't we all ancestors, really? Like all of us. That's one thing we will universally be. Aziz, I feel like I'm hearing some of your family in the background.
Yeah, my daughter. Yeah, my daughter. She is speaking.
I love that. And I'm wondering, can I invite your voice in to share the story? So we are so fortunate today to be joined by Aziz Roish. Some of you know that the registration fees for this webinar went to support girls in Afghanistan to be able to continue their education. And the person who, while that's the current phase of this project, really, this was part of a generational change strategy that Aziz and the team at Marifat School in Afghanistan builds with a vision, a generational vision, to say, what does it go beyond what we do for our families to do and imagine a world and then work to build a world where Afghanistan is a model of a humanistic democracy in the Middle East and for the world. And then to go about doing it, I think there are very few generational thinkers as powerful and as resilient as Aziz Roish. So Aziz, I'm going to welcome you into the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about your
Thank
path
you.
and journey?
It's really my pleasure, and I'm honored to be here in this group. Actually, the power of education for me came from the power of the vision that we had for the girls' education and women empowerment in Afghanistan. Because when I was in the refugee camps in Pakistan, we started this co-education system. And I learned there that the patrimonial vision of the community as a cultural in structure, that it cannot be changed unless the woman participation is ensured through a very highly qualified critical thinking education. And because of that, when we started that in Pakistan and returned back to Afghanistan after 9/11, we focused on that. And in 20 years in Afghanistan, we literally saw the impact of that in a transformation, and a very big transformational story in a community which I belong to, which is one of the most marginalized and persecuted ethnic community in Afghanistan. I'm sure most of you know that Afghanistan is not as a nation, that should be regarded all its citizens as the citizens. It is a community of tribes, and especially ethnic communities. There are 4 or 5 big ethnic communities that throughout the history, they have been not in good terms with each other. Especially our ethnic community, it has been one of the most persecuted and marginalized ethnic community for centuries. And 100 years back, more than 62% of this community was completely annihilated. And according to history, and the remnants, they were changed into slaves. And for 100 years, they were the slaves and the second and the third class of the community citizens. It went to the war against the Soviets and then the Civil War. And after 9/11, there was a new era opened in Afghanistan that came with the universal values of democracy, of the human rights, and having the support and the contribution of the international community in Afghanistan. So it gave a chance for our community, and especially for my center as this initiative in Afghanistan, that we established that. And in 20 years, to start with just one example, when we started our program in Afghanistan, we just started with 37 students in different ages of 6 to 7 to 25, male and female. We had just 8 teachers, that 5 of them were religious students, and they had just studies in the religious schools. We had 2 teachers that they were the graduates of 12th graders, and one, a military colonel, that he claimed to know math, and he was, our teacher. We started with that, with just around 70 to 75,000 Pakistani rupees, equivalent to around $600, something like that. And we started with that for 4 years. We were the only private center school in Afghanistan that was not even at any other school in the entire country. But we came along in 20 years. And this community that was around 12 or 13 million people, we had a very high percentage of literacy rate. Around 90% of the community had gotten literacy. And while Afghanistan was regarded as the most dangerous country for women, the Hazara community was the safest ethnic community that we didn't have even a single case of violence against women. And women harassment, street harassment, and so that was completely missing when you came to the western part of Kabul, where our school was located, and that other people were working there. You could see completely a new territory in the Kabul. Now, again, although Taliban have brought a new system with a very brutal apartheid-oriented regime, which is against gender apartheid, I mean, that is completely violating all rights of women. But still, I believe that we have a very big chance to transform the community, not only Afghanistan, but it should be as a model for all. And it needs a collaboration, between all. All of us can share hands. We can contribute with this. I'm sure that we have very critical challenges now, especially with the war which is going on now in the Middle East, or what is going on in Iran and Russia and Ukraine or in Afghanistan. But it is the peak of the legitimacy, of the popular legitimacy of war again. Now it is a time for us to change the page. And for me, girls' education is still the key point for that. And what Soma is saying as something which had happened in Afghanistan, it is just the story of education, critical thinking education, or civic education with girls' orientation. Yes, Soma.
Oh, no, I just wanted to, so Aziz, I seem to remember a few years being involved in a few conversations with the State Department as you and your family had to flee. And then you came back, and now how many girls are continuing their education despite the Taliban regime?
Over 4,000 now. Over 4,000 students we have in our initiative, which is called Class Education. It is in person in 8 provinces of Afghanistan through a very good, I can say, that the coordination of the local authorities or our classroom coordinators there in the schools. They have managed to continue this education for over 23 months now. It is now 23 months that we have continued that. And I would be very happy from our friends here that if you could make a time, I can share, some opportunities for you. Every week we have 2 empowerment sessions with the senior students of these clusters, and students participate there. They speak English well. That most of our guest speakers, they are talking in English with them. I would be very happy to have you as a guest speaker, and Shoma is also on our list, and in one of our sessions she will be there. It is an amazing, amazing experience now. You see that the power of resilience just comes from the inside of the students. These girls, despite having the brutal regime of Taliban in control, they even do not doubt in themselves. They do not doubt in their future. They feel that everything is a question for them and they have to find an answer for that. And they are working for that. These girls that they are at the age of 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and this age is.
Thank you so much, Aziz, for joining us, and above all, for the incredible work that you are doing to be part of building the future of Afghanistan. I think it's so hard sometimes in the midst of what we see as grim moments to imagine a future and to have the courage to act on that imagination. But that's what Aziz is doing. And what it means for us at We in the World to be a better ancestor is to know that no one changes the world alone. And so while I might be looking at creating healing in my own family, and Drew is looking and calling in the legacies of his great grandfather, and looking at what's happening with Black farmers, that what we're doing is saying collectively, who is doing this work of being and building the space for better ancestors. All of us don't have to come up with our own initiatives. That is such a common thing to do. All of us have to act. All of us have to do that healing in our own lives, in our own families, in our own communities. Then how can we also bring our power and privilege to support Aziz and others in their dreams, whether that's him as he's doing this work. This is Dr. Ruby Gibson in Pine Ridge, outside of Pine Ridge, South Dakota, who's healing generational trauma. These are amazing communities of Black farmers in North Carolina. The world is not poor in people who are seeking to create the change that they need to see in the world. We don't have to be brilliant on behalf of people experiencing harm. We have to bring our power and privilege to lift up those shackles and to create the pathways for life to flow, for resources to flow, and for support to flow, to use our power and privilege to build not gears of a system, but pathways that create the conditions for healing, for restoration. So we don't have to be busy saving the world. We can have the joy of enjoying and building the world together. Drew, can I invite your voice back in? And can I invite all of your voices back in? Often in our work, we begin and end with poems. And so this is a poem that we often share, and I'm going to invite you to read this poem together. Drew's going to lead us, but I'm going to invite all of you to unmute and say this together. We'll see if it's a complete failure, but I don't think so, because Drew has a great voice. And then invite you, as you reflect on this poem, to flood the chat with a word that speaks to you from this poem. Thank you. Drew.
Okay, on the count of three, we'll start together. 1, 2, 3. I will not
unlived life. I will not live in fear, falling, or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as a seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit.
And then Drew, can I invite you to repeat the whole thing one more time? And then this time we'll all be quiet as Drew, just to listen and reflect.
I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, 2 or 3 words. Thank you.
Just take a minute. And I'll pass it back to you, Chris.
All right. I think we actually have a few minutes. If there's anyone who wants to share any final reflections, maybe something that came up in your breakout conversation, maybe something that's emerged since or before. But let's take a little bit of space here in case something's standing out to you that you'd like to share. And maybe you're hesitating. Maybe you want to share. Some part of you wants to share, but you're not. In which case, I extra invite you to share.
Or has her hand up.
Drew made me want to know more about my ancestors. I just realized I don't know a lot about my grandfather and great grandfather, and it's so important because there's so much wisdom. And I think about my father and all that he went through as one of 2 Black submariners, and the kind of things that he had to go through, all that training, and saved his shipmate's life, yet was relic to working in the kitchen. And so we do a lot of disservice because we waste talent in this country and around the world because we don't really see people. And Russ knows that my big thing is the love factor, which is lifting others, validates everyone. So I just wanted to say that this has really been very great for me. And Drew, I will be knocking on the doors, trying to find as much as I can after you shared all of what you did with me. So I appreciate that.
I honestly, I can put you in contact with my father. He lives for this, so definitely talk offline. I can help you out.
Might be good for your book too, Deborah. Another person.
Catkin has an important question in the chat, Russ, about how one transitions from the anger and suffering of generational trauma to creating a pathway of hope and healing. Oh, it's so easy to tear down, isn't it? To harm, and takes so long to build and grow. And I think so much of this work, I invite anybody's voice in answering this question. And actually, Aziz, can I invite your voice in particular? I remember speaking with you after ISIS had attacked a peaceful demonstration that your students had been leading, and over 300 people had been harmed or died.
Yeah, I think our story has similar pieces that can help us to understand this question and also the depth of this question. The trauma of what we have experienced all in the very turmoil situations remains forever. No one can claim that they can forget their past and their experiences at all. But what we have learned that you can change that experience into a system of aware thought for yourself, and then to change that into a flame and awareness for your future. And that is just a simple formula that if that has been something bad that you have suffered, first, you should stop that for yourself, find ways that that should not be repeated in your life, and also you should not repeat that to the others. If that has been something good, any experience that you have in the past, you should repeat that for yourself and try to expand that. This is the formula of transformational education that we have experienced. I saw that most of my students and the people that we were working with, they had suffered a lot from the time of war. They have been tortured, they have been discriminated against, they have been treated very inhumanly. But the solution or the answer for that was not a repetition of the same act. It was to just change your vision, to have to a completely new perspective, to see that if you again spend your time for retaliation, for avenge, you will not get anything but to lose lots of the things that you have for a better future of yourself. And that was something as a miracle that happened. And minds, especially for myself, it was as a personal experience for myself. It helped me to have a relief in myself and to feel that I am now not burdened with this trauma of war times. Again, I think this question remains for all of us, that when we especially see our, the people that they have tortured us, they have inflicted lots of these kinds of bad things on us, they are still on the ground, they're still in power, and it is really difficult for you to forgive them. It is really difficult for you to ignore them. But again, when you come to this question and to look at your future, that what you are going to achieve in the future, it becomes easier to cross this trauma. And for me, it has been done. And now I feel in Afghanistan, especially, we are challenged with millions of people that they are facing with the Taliban, that they should not return back to retaliate, even against this Taliban. Otherwise, this repetition, this cycle will not end at all. This is something that we have to tell to each other. We have to. And this transformation just comes from your inside. It doesn't go outside of yourself. It cannot be reflected in the outside if you are not the access point of that yourself, or you do not have that flame inside yourself.
You, Aziz. You often say it's about that transformation from within to then be back to be able to transform together. And on that basis, to begin to transform our outcomes, policies, and systems.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, Keely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I mean, like I have shared in my group, I am very connected to my ancestors, and I understand how I have a very high sense of connectivity of what I am today is not made by me. It was made by the people that came before me, and what is going to be ahead of me is going to have also my contribution to form the world, the generation after I. So there's that awareness of knowing that I don't exist out of a blue. And who I am, my mission, my drive, my talent, my skill set, why I do what I do is informed by what have come before me. And the generation next of me will do what they do based on how I inform what they do and what they be. And so again, being aware, I think oftentimes when we have this conversation, I have people who said, I don't even know my ancestors. I don't even know anybody before me. I don't even care. Some people like the European descent have moved from one place to the other, and they lost or not even taking the time to think. And then got caught up in, this is who I am what I made myself to be. And oftentimes just taking that pause to reason around or think back or ask questions. I used to, when I was teaching the college, we have an activity to actually, who are you? And how you connected to who came before you or before them and all that, who's going to be after you, and just making those connections. I think it's an exercise, like Sharma, you mentioned, right? It's going to take courage. You're going to unpack a whole lot of stuff, and also it's going to take discipline.
Thank you, Keely.
The last word to an Agoni princess who stared down tanks in her home country and is now creating change in Manchester. Thank you, Keely.
So there'll be some more in the deck that we'll share about other learning opportunities. If you would like to stay connected in this series, we're going to have other deep dives into this topic of well-being for all. We'd love to have you. You can subscribe to the Co-Creative newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter at Academy for Systems Change. There are ways that we're going to share in the follow-up email about how to connect with we in the world. So many opportunities to continue and deepen, and then maybe we form a learning community together as we move forward. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Shoma. Thank you, Aziz, for sharing your stories. for sharing your perspectives, for asking us really powerful questions.
Thank you.
Before we get off here, let's unmute. And if you could turn your video on, if you have it off, let's give one another a human greeting, an appreciation, a blessing, a goodbye, however you'd like to say that. 3, 2, 1.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It
Thank
was
you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.